This is a guide to supplement the fashion of crate B cannons. This mod will add a large number of guns and automatic guns to the game, as well as interesting mechanics of their production. And the sponsor of this video is a kind man with the nickname Torret, who is trying to shoot developing content on Minecraft and not only. Perhaps a worthy gay model will grow out of it, or create TV series. A link to it will be in the description. Let's figure out what kind of guns and automatic guns there are in this mod. They can be divided into two large categories: stationary ones that stand still, but they can be aimed at the target, and movable, which can be moved using a trolley, which in rare cases is much more convenient. The size of a cannon or cannon directly affects its characteristics, just like the material from which it is made. Therefore, let's now figure out how to make guns and guns after all. This process is complicated, but interesting. Speaking of materials, this mod adds cast iron, bronze, steel and non-ferrous steel. Since the mod is still in beta, there is simply no crafting for some materials. At the moment, cast iron and non-ferrous steel have it. And now we'll talk about the cover for melting. With its help, you will be able to melt some objects in the bowl, getting their liquid versions, but at the same time the bowl must be heated with a flare burner. There are not many recipes here, but I think more will be added in the future. Melts can be extracted using pipes and mechanical pumps. Unfortunately, through the hole in the lid you will not be able to put objects inside the bowl, so you will have to come up with other ways, and this is the main drawback. But there are many options for how to do this. And for the melting cap, you will need 4 andesite alloys. You need to understand that each gun consists of several blocks, and let's figure out how to make them. First you need to make a lithium mold, but you should already know what size your cannon or cannon will be. Remember, each part must have its own mold. To make a mold, you need to put a block of wood on a mechanical saw, the blade of which is mounted upwards. But keep in mind that the crafting will be random and the desired mold will not fall out immediately. And now we will master casting into the ground. We will need a casting mold, a melt that we will pour, and sand for casting, a new block. Next, using sand for casting, build the following structure with dimensions of 3 by 3 and a void in the center. Then take the front form, put it in the center and take the sand for casting again, right-click on this form. With an empty hand, click on the form again and take it away. The design has changed its visual appearance. Now it's important to pour the right liquid. For example, we used a large casting mold, and if we pour molten bronze here, then we will not craft, because this detail is simply missing. A melt made of steel or non-stainless steel will suit us, because there are big details here. We finish building the pipes, make them transparent and pour the liquid. When the form is filled out, we will get a block like this, but it has not completely frozen yet. We have to wait. In the recipes of injection molding sand, you can see the solidification period of each material in a certain detail. There are a lot of them there, but do not try to extract parts or full-fledged parts of the gun with a pickaxe, otherwise they will break into fragments. Therefore, you can make a sandwich like this with several layers of injection sand, each of which will have a mold. And immediately fill everything with melt. After removing all the layers of sand, you will get a large billet, but this is not a cannon yet. The details of automatic guns are made easier. Click on the face forms with injection sand, and then again only with an empty hand, and they are ready. By the way, the parts cast according to the sandwich scheme are already interconnected, they do not need to be glued together and can be moved at once. And to make sand for casting you will need 2 sand, earth and a lump of clay. The next stage. In the received parts, we will make a hole with a cannon drill. But we need to prepare. You will need the cannon drill itself, a mechanical rotator, water for cooling and several piston extensions. We deliver our gun to the mechanical rotator, we don't need it anymore. We build a similar scheme so that the mechanical rotator and the cannon are in line with the cannon drill. Turn on our rotator. We bring water to the cannon drill. We put piston extensions behind the cannon drill, so much so that the drill could extend to the length of the cannon blocks. We start the mechanisms. And the most important point, the rotation speed of the cannon drill should be exactly the same as the rotation speed of the mechanical rotator with the cannon. Depending on the materials, after drilling you will get such pieces that you can put the ingot back together or melt it down. After drilling the bronze and cast iron parts, you already get the completed parts of the gun that can be used. But after creating parts made of non-stainless steel, you get layers, which I will tell you about now. The actual layer builder. It is needed in order to press one layer into another. To use it, you will need a power source, a couple of piston extensions and a lever. I advise you to use a reversible gearbox in conjunction with this mechanism to make it easier to control it. Imagine that I want to make an intermediate barrel of a steel cannon. We look at the recipes. We will need a small layer, medium, very small and large layer. Then I take the blanks that we received after drilling. Then we install them on the same line in any sequence. Then we press the lever so that our mechanism lights up. Now I press the lever on the reverse gearbox. The mechanism stalled and it seemed to you that it was overloaded, but it is not. We release and turn it on again and the part is driven. And now I'm showing an error. We have not turned off the glow on the mechanism and are returning the mechanism to its original position again. And the biggest layer stuck to us and came back. Therefore, always turn off the red glow after you have driven one part, turn it off. You see, the color has changed to a dimmer one and you can safely return the mechanism to its original position. We continue to add new blocks and press them into our first part. As a result, we get such a matryoshka doll, consisting of 4 parts inside. And that's not all, friends. After you've driven the parts one by one, you need to fuse them, it's even written in the recipe. And we will fuse them with the help of a fan in front of which there is lava. The glory fan should stand like this, 1 block higher. But this option is wrong, you can't do that. This is a very long process, it took me 4 minutes, taking into account the fact that the fan was working at maximum from the creative engine. Note that in the completed part, the central part will be black, and if the process is not completed, then you will see through it. For the layer buildup, you will need 2 pieces of iron, an iron plate, a tandazite body in a piston extension. And to create a cannon drill, you will need an iron ingot, 2 liquid pipes, an andesite body in a piston extension. Also in this mod there is a magic wand of the creator of the cannon. A right click on the cooling melt will instantly turn it into a blank, and a click on the blank will make a hole in it. And clicking on the blank layers will instantly complete its creation. But she has one drawback, she is creative. We already know how to make the details, let's assemble a simple stationary cannon, which will be made of cast iron. We will need a cannon mount, a cannon rotation controller, the end of a cast iron cannon, the barrel of a cast iron cannon and the muzzle of a cast iron cannon. We also need at least 2 levers. On the cannon mount, where there is such a hammer, we put 1 lever, and where there is a stripe with such an orange thing, the second. By pressing the lever where the hammer was, you will assemble the cannon. In the assembled state, by applying rotation to the cannon mount, you will raise or start the muzzle of the cannon. The type of material and its weight determines how much effort you will need to move it. To turn the gun itself, you need to apply rotation to the gun rotation controller and it is fed only from below. For cannon mounting, you will need 2 iron sheets, for shafts, an andesite case and 2 gunpowder. And for the gun rotation controller, you will need 1 andesite case, 2 gunpowder and 2 shafts. So how do you shoot a cannon? We remember about the second lever, where there was such an orange dot, and we give a rest and signal to the gun to fire, but the most interesting thing is how to charge it and do it correctly so that it does not explode. Let's get ready first. We'll need a powder charge and a heavy shell. There are a lot of shells in this fashion, we'll talk about them later. Then there is a gun loader, a pushing nozzle and a couple of piston extensions. Your task is to make a sausage like this and shove it into the cannon until the very end. But the difficulty is that you can have guns of different sizes and different materials, and for each of them you have to calculate the correct number of powder charges and the length of the muzzle, otherwise something can go wrong. And to make a powder charge, you will need to make compressed powder in a mechanical press of 6 powders, as well as an empty powder charge, which is made of any wool and 2 threads. And to make a heavy projectile, you will need 4 iron ingots, 2 pieces of iron and some kind of plate. Pointing at different parts of the gun with a clamped shaft, you will notice such parameters as strength, the ratio of the maximum length of the muzzle to the number of charges and the load created. For example, a gun made of cast iron is maximally capable of withstanding 2 powder charges. The ratio of the length of the muzzle is 1:1. This means that the maximum possible gun made of cast iron will consist of the end of the gun, 2 barrels and 2 muzzles. If we open a hint from the Kree fashion, we will notice that the powder charges should be located in the barrel, not in the muzzle. And we will have only one projectile and it is located in the very first muzzle. Example number 2. Let's calculate a bronze cannon, which we will have not for 4 maximum possible powder charges, but say for 3. Our ratio is 3:2, that is, for 1 powder charge we have 1.5 blocks of muzzle length. Therefore, we multiply 3 by 1 and 5, we get 4.5. We round this number to an integer and get 5. And I want to mention something about the guns of steel and Nozzle steel. Steel guns have such types of blocks as a thick layer of a steel gun, an intermediate barrel of a steel gun, an intermediate muzzle, but also a thick layer of non-graphite steel, not translated at all, but it says here that this is also an intermediate barrel. And this, as I understand it, is an intermediate muzzle. When calculating the cannon, consider that the intermediate barrel and the thick layer of the cannon are just the barrel. Well, accordingly, you equate the intermediate muzzle to the usual one and you will have no problems with the calculation. Let's put our knowledge into practice. We make such a construction. By the way, the projectile can be placed on either side. The cannon will fire, it will not explode. Then a gun loader, a pusher nozzle to it, a couple of extension pistons, a reversing mechanism, a power source and a lever. We press the lever and wait until the pusher pushes our sausage as far as possible and stops itself. Don't ever do that, it's wrong. This is an example of what will happen inside your gun if you break the piston extensions without removing the nozzle from the gun. And this is the right option. We load up to the stop, press the lever again and just take out the pushers. The next common mistake is if you have a large cannon and you have not pushed your powder charges to the very end of the cannon. If you assemble a cannon and shoot at the same time, an explosion will occur. Also, by opening the powder charges hint, you will be told that you should not load more powder charges than your gun can withstand. Now I'm not talking about the material itself, but about the number of barrels. For example, we have 2 barrels, and here are 3 powder charges. Another situation. We have built a cannon that holds 3 powder charges at most, and we will load only 2. You may be led and you will shoot, or as in my case, there will be such a sound. Powder shells were not enough and the projectile got stuck in the muzzle or barrel. Therefore, there is a spring attachment for such situations. Remove the pushing nozzle, put the spring in its place and drive it all the way until it rests against what needs to be removed from the gun, and then return it back. And we'll get what's stuck with us. Recipes for a gun loader: you will need gunpowder, an andesite casing and a piston extension. For the pusher nozzle, you will need any board and a piston extension, and for the nozzle spring, you will need 3 pieces of iron rods and a piston extension. Also in this fashion there are 2 interesting items that perform the function of a pushing and spring nozzle, but at the same time they can be held in your hand. For example, ram mouth, perhaps the item will be brought, allows you to push 3 blocks as far forward as possible with the right mouse click, thereby loading small guns. At the cost of hunger points. As soon as the charges and shells have disappeared from the cannon, start already clicking on the muzzle and they will also move 1 block per click. And yes, you can move our sausage no further than 5 blocks when it is inside the cannon, because the stick is short. And a similar item by the action of worm, which allows you to pull 1 block from the cannon with a right click, but no further than 5 blocks from the very last muzzle. For a worm you will need a spring attachment and 2 sticks, and for a ram rod you will need a push attachment and also 2 sticks. Now let's talk about the types of ends of the gun, because some of them will allow you to quickly load the gun without thrusting projectiles through the muzzle. This became possible thanks to the breech of the gun. It can only be made for guns made of cast iron, bronze and steel. It is installed at the very end of the gun, and to open it you need to apply rotation. Then you can safely load into our sausage, consisting of charges and shells. Important: there should be no powder charges in the breech of the gun, because it is a bolt. After completing the preparations, close your breech by changing the direction of rotation and assemble the cannon. She's ready to shoot. But installing this unit reduces the strength of your gun, and you will be able to load up to 4 powder charges as much as possible. To create a breech of a cannon, you first need to cast a non-drilled blank, then make a hole and knot on a cannon drill, and then place it somewhere and click first with the shaft, and then with the breech of the cannon. The closure of the shutter is done using 2 gears and 3 ingots of the material from which you will make the gun. Unfortunately, there are no ingots for materials and steel yet, just like for bronze. And then we have piston valves. They are only available for guns and steel and non-steel. They are placed at the back and open by rotation, and then they can be lifted, loaded with shells, lowered back, closed, assemble the cannon and fire. They differ from the breech parts of the gun in that they do not impose a penalty on the maximum number of powder charges. And to create a piston bolt, you first have to cast a non-drilled piston bolt, make a hole in it on a cannon drill, then install the workpiece, first click the shaft with the right mouse button, and then the piston bolt. And for a piston bolt, this is a part, not the block itself. You will need a shaft and 3 ingots of the material from which your gun is made. And now we'll talk about the types of shells, because each of them has its own purpose. The first in line is a heavy projectile. It easily penetrates through soft blocks, but there are problems with harder blocks. Next we have an armor-piercing shell. It has an increased penetrating power and destructive power, and only obsidian can save from it. Mortar Shell. It does not have the highest penetrating power, but it flies a longer distance compared to other projectiles. A bag of shot is effective against soft blocks and causes weak damage over a large area. And the maximum potential of the following projectiles is revealed only with fuses, which are installed by right-clicking on the corresponding projectiles. And also the right click of an empty hand is removed. Pointing at the projectile and pressing the shift you will see when detonating, this means that you can put a fuse there. Or visually look, usually on the shells where it can be placed there is such a large rectangular square in the center. By installing a contact fuse, your projectile will explode when it collides with an obstacle. Due to the fact that it is the cheapest and simplest, the probability of its operation is only 67%. But then he did explode. Fuse with timer. The projectile will explode after a certain time. To adjust this time, take it in your hand, right-click and hover over the slider. By turning the wheel, you will change the delay before the explosion. Proximity fuse is a contactless fuse that will explode after a certain distance that the projectile will fly. Take it in your hand and right-click. By rotating the wheel here you can change the distance after which the projectile will explode. And recipes. For a contact fuse, you will need any button and retonite dust. For a fuse with timers, you will need an iron ingot, a watch and also resin dust. And for the Mitya fuse or contactless fuse, you will need iron rods, 2 resin dust, nether quartz and an iron ingot. And we go back to the shells and the next one is high explosive. Without a fuse installed, it will behave like a very ordinary projectile, but the explosion will be very powerful after a collision with a fuse. Another armor-piercing projectile, without a fuse, it has an average penetrating force, and with it it increases. Next we have a shrapnel shell. Without a fuse, it behaves like an ordinary projectile with an average penetrating force, but the maximum potential is revealed when it explodes in flight, covering a large area with fragments and destroying the enemy's manpower. A shell or liquid projectile flows. From its front face, liquid can be poured into it, then a fuse can be installed and fired. And the effect of this liquid will spread over the area. Advice: a pusher on a stick loads projectiles with a right mouse click, and to drive the projectiles with a maturation, sit down and also right-click. An ordinary armor-piercing projectile is made of 3 iron ingots and 1 cast iron, and you will also need some kind of wood plate. A mortar shell is made of any 4 stones and also a wooden slab. A bag of shot is made of 3 threads, 2 wool, some kind of wooden plate and metal balls, which are made, respectively, of 8 pieces of iron and an iron ingot. A high-explosive projectile is made only on a mechanical crafter and requires 5 iron ingots, 2 dynamites and a wooden slab. Similarly, an armor-piercing projectile with a fuse is done on a crafter. He will require 4 iron ingots, 2 cast iron ingots, dynamite and a wooden slab. A shrapnel shell is also made on a mechanical crafter, requires 5 iron ingots, 1 metal ball, gunpowder, a wooden plate. A liquid projectile is also made on a mechanical crater, requires 5 iron ingots, 2 liquid pipes and a wooden plate. Next, let's talk about automatic guns or machine guns. They all consist of 3 parts: breech, return spring and muzzle. The type of materials determines the maximum size of your cannon. You should have 1 block each of the breech and the return spring, and the muzzle can be increased by putting them more. The longer the length of the muzzle, the faster the projectile flies. It's even visible visually. For now, I suggest learning how to do all the above-mentioned details. Let's start with the breech. To begin with, you cast the workpiece and make a hole in it with a cannon drill. And the last stage, you insert a special part into the workpiece with a hole. As a result, you get a ready-made casket part. But to make this special part, you have to put an ingot of the material from which your automatic gun is made on a mechanical saw. From the received part, repeat the same 2 more times. And the craft of the return spring. Similarly, we make a blank, then drill a hole in it on a cannon drill, and then you need to put a recoil spring in it. Here to make it you will need a spring wire. To make this part, you need to put 1 iron sheet on a mechanical saw. But alas, in this fashion there is another recipe from an iron sheet on a mechanical saw, so with some probability crafting may be different. Then we process this part 3 times on a mechanical press and get the coveted recoil spring. Well, let's see how to make a muzzle. You need to make a blank first and just drill a hole in it with a cannon drill and the muzzle is ready. And now let's talk about cartridges, about their types and how to make them. There are 2 types of cartridges in total, armor-piercing and anti-aircraft. An armor-piercing cartridge is made from an armor-piercing charge and a cartridge case with gunpowder, and anti-aircraft cartridges from an anti-aircraft charge and also a cartridge case with gunpowder. And to make a cartridge case with gunpowder, you have to cut a sheet of metal on a mechanical saw. Then you have to process the received part or cartridge 6 times on a mechanical press. As a result, you will get an empty sleeve. And then you need to process the empty sleeve with an autonomous activator, in which the gunpowder is placed 3 times. And as a result, you will get a cartridge case with gunpowder. Let's assemble our cannon. Cannon mount. On the level of this stick we put the machine gun blocks. We put a breech, a return spring and 2 muzzles, because the maximum length of our gun is 4 blocks. Where we put the hammer is an ordinary lever, and where there is such an orange thing, we put an analog one. Then I will explain why. You need to load cartridges into the cannon mount. This can be done using a funnel from a regular Minecraft or in any other way, for example, a funnel from a mod. As soon as you assemble the gun and press the second lever to give the right signal, the gun will fire automatically, but it will do it slowly. The rate of fire of the gun depends on the strength of the signal growth, which is applied to the orange side. And just the analog lever allows you to adjust this very signal strength by changing the rate of fire of the gun. By the way, this gun can work in manual mode, but you need to set a hotkey. Go to the key assignment control settings and find the creep by Kenon's headlight controller. Kenon's, I have a minus. With a wrench, click on the breech and special handles will appear. Assemble the gun, click on these handles and that's it. You sat down for it and can control it, and by pressing that special button, you can shoot accordingly. You can also customize your cannon. Take a wrench and click on the muzzle and it will change. You can also return everything back with a wrench. The seat from the Crete fashion can be installed on the breech by clicking it on the breech. A click with an empty hand will remove. And about the cartridges. Armor-piercing anti-aircraft shells, when hit by soft blocks such as earth, sand, wood, will explode them. And if you hit solid blocks, then you will damage the block for a while, and if you continue to attack this place, sooner or later you will break it. A ricochet system is implemented for all projectiles. If you hit the upper part of the block, then most likely the projectile will bounce, and if you shoot at the same block, hit the side face, then an explosion and detonation of this block will occur. I compared armor-piercing anti-aircraft shells by penetrating force, and I can say that anti-aircraft shells are not able to penetrate solid blocks. When crafting an anti-aircraft projectile, you can also install a fuse. And then, after detonation, an anti-aircraft shell will release shrapnel, causing an oran on the area. And now let's talk about mobile guns and guns. To begin with, put the cart and at this level proceed to the assembly of your machine gun or cannon. Then right-click with a wrench on the trolley block, and it will assemble into a movable structure. And she also understands the key. But keep in mind, the bigger your gun, the more difficult it will be to turn and move it. Now let's talk about the control of a movable cannon. But first we assign a key. Go to Settings, Management, Key Assignment, find the Create Big Cannons and set the key for the channel speech mod. We disassemble the cannon, put our powder charges and projectile, push it all in any way and reassemble our cannon. Now you can shoot. Sit down at the gun, hold down the channel carriage mod key, while holding the W or S and you will lower or raise the muzzle. Well, the rotation of the gun is carried out using the usual keys A and D, and to shoot, press the fire control key, the one that we set for shooting in automatic guns. And let's talk about mobile automatic guns. Lifting the muzzle and firing it, as well as turning the cannon and firing are exactly the same as with a large cannon, using the same keys, but by rotating the wheel you can also change the rate of fire of the cannon. It is not necessary to load the gun, the main thing is that you have cartridges inside your inventory. You can also disassemble the gun, click on the breech with a wrench and add handles. Then you can control it manually. The barrel can also be customized, and with the right mouse click, install the scratch seat on the breech. And to create a cart, you will need one shaft, any 4 boards and 2 wheels. These wheels are made of any wood and 4 iron sheets. And Enderka was with you, and it was a big cans fashion guide.